Hello and welcome to Unleashed. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm excited to be here today with Nadine Sinclair, who has a doctorate in molecular biology, is a former engagement manager at McKinsey, is an independent consultant, and advises companies on how to improve conditions for mental health for their employees. Nadine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Will. Excited to be here.
All right. So before we get into mental health and your consulting, I got to ask, so you tell me before we start recording that you just got back from the beach, you live in Malta, and I think you may be the first person I've ever spoken to who's in Malta. So like, what should I know about Malta other than that it's in the Mediterranean? I know like almost nothing about it, like the Knights of Malta, and that's about it. So tell me, like, give me this sort of 1 minute about what I should know about Malta and how you ended up there.
Okay, that's a good one. Maybe I'll start with how I ended up here. We were on holiday here in 2011.
Okay.
Liked it, but never thought about it being a place we would eventually move to. And about 2.5 years ago, we sold a food business my husband and I were running in Munich in Germany. And it was really like a blank slate. We're like, okay, what are we going to do? And where are we going to go? And we said, hey, actually, we can be anywhere. So we actually spoke to a bunch of people. What's a good place for an entrepreneur to be based in Europe, which is connected so that I can still serve my consulting clients, is quite good in terms of business conditions, tax-wise, and business climate, and where the main language is English, because my husband is English. So so we zoomed on in Malta. We're both divers. So it's a small island. It's really good for diving. It's got a lot of sunny days. I think about the most sunny days in Europe a year. So yeah, about 2.5 years ago, we took the leap, moved out here and started our new business here, the Mind Matters business.
That's amazing. Now, Malta, I mean, I sound so stupid here. I could have checked Wikipedia, but like Malta, it's its own country, right?
It is, yeah. It's I think the smallest country in Europe, yeah.
Oh, is that right? Okay. So is it part of the European Union? So if you're...
It is, yeah.
Oh, so if you're...
About 400,000 people, roughly.
How many?
400,000.
Okay.
It's
All right.
really
So I mean,
like city more.
right. But it's sort of on the scale of Iceland, I guess. I mean, it's bigger than Iceland, right? So
I have to admit, I don't know how big Iceland is.
Okay. So it's 400,000 people. That's a pretty tiny country. It's like a small, mid-sized city. And I guess it must have its own navy and so forth. And it's a good business climate. Tell me about that a little bit. Is it easy to start a business there? Pretty good tax regime?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's there's a lot of entrepreneurs here, so you can actually meet a lot of people, especially in the digital space, Bitcoin, blockchain people. They all flock here from Europe, so it's quite a nice international crowd of entrepreneurs, consultants. Yeah.
Wow, totally not a place that was on my radar screen, but it sounds like it'd be a fun place to visit and just meet people, and maybe be a global nomad for a month and check it out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Give us a shout.
So let's talk about your work a little bit. So, so you do some consulting. You were engagement manager at McKinsey, but you also do some work that's slightly different, which is more about helping companies create the better conditions for better mental health for the employees. I probably am not saying that correctly, and help me understand that piece of your work.
Yeah, so I think over the last year, mental health in the workplace has become a lot more prominent for a lot of companies. But it's actually an ongoing trend that has been probably going the last 15 years, where mental health in general and mental health in the workplace is keeping on deteriorating. And part of the reason is that the way we work has changed, but what we keep forgetting is that the way our brain works has not changed. Right, so there's a mismatch of how our brains work, and as a result, how our mental health works and how workplaces work nowadays. And just to give you an example, a big discussion here in Malta is about actually establishing a law around the right to disconnect from work. You know, people working from home, and there's the unspoken or sometimes even spoken expectations that they're available 24/7, that they reply to emails around the clock. And as a consultant, that doesn't sound like really strange. But for a lot of people, this came really sudden, and paired with job insecurity over the last year, where people are really worried. You know, some of them work shorter hours or are worried about their jobs in general. People feel pressure to work around the clock. So the discussion even goes, you know, establishing a law around the right to disconnect from your workplace. And our work really focuses on first of all, having a discussion with employers around the actual cost that poor mental health at work is actually hurting their bottom line. And we just actually finished an analysis, a report that we are going to publish next week, that the estimate is for European employers. This number is about 470 billion euros a year. That's a lot of bottom line to get lost, right? And there's also enough evidence that shows if you execute a mental health program well in a company, you can actually get a significant return on investment. So you can actually improve your bottom line by helping improve mental health in the workplace.
Okay, so if you were sort of an evil capitalist, you might just say, I don't care about the mental health of my employees. I'm just going to crack the whip until they, to just get more output. But for knowledge workers, there's some probably declining marginal benefit from cracking the whip, because at some point people just start breaking down and actually making worse decisions. Or what are some of the ways that poor mental health of employees actually hurt the bottom line? Like what are some examples?
Wow. Well, straight in the numbers, the first one is it drives absence from the workplace, right? A lot of mental health problems obviously leads to absence directly, but also indirectly, because people have tension headaches, they have back pains, they have gastrointestinal issues. So a lot of things that we see as typical physical health is actually problems, is a manifestation of actually poor mental health. So what you see actually fairly quickly is absence is one of the drivers of the cost, but the other one is actually presence when you're actually not fit to work. And depending on the company, that can be like 40-50% of your productive hours that are lost to being present in the workplace with poor mental health. So if you look at the overall cost, 2/3 of the cost are actually people showing up at work and not being fit to work.
In terms of maybe just making poor decisions, or
it's getting into conflicts with coworkers, it's making poor decisions, it's lacking motivation, it's taking longer to complete tasks that otherwise would come easy to them. It's like dropping the ball when you're juggling multiple things. It's making poor decisions. It's really got a big string of effects. It's not being able to memorize things properly. And also having the connection, and especially if you're a leader in the workplace, you create this whole knock-on effect where it affects your entire team. And if you're as a leader are struggling with your mental health, your entire team will suffer.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that a company can do? Let's talk first about how does a leadership company recognize that they may have a problem? Let's talk about that. And then we can talk about what are some of the things that a company could do about it. So how do you know if you have a problem? How should you assess your existing current state?
That's actually a very good question, because there is actually not many tools out there to really do that properly, right? There's a lot of tools that allow you to measure how many days people are absent from work. There is very poor tools to measure actually what's productivity loss. Maybe you got a higher turnover, especially like voluntary turnover, people leaving the company, you're not able to retain talent. But one of the challenges is that most companies or most measurements only focus on the end of the spectrum. And I'm deliberately talking about a spectrum because mental health is not something that's an on or off switch. Either you're healthy or you're not. But it's a continuum from really well-being and thriving at work to really struggling and suffering. But most companies, the same as most of our medical system, really focuses on interventions and treatment once people are struggling and suffering. And that's part of the problem, because that's what gets measured. How many people burn out? How many people take time off because of depression?
Right.
But in actual fact, that most of the people will be in the middle spectrum, where life is just not as good and productive as it could be. Right. And that's one of the problems that we are addressing when we work with our clients. So what we did over the last few years actually is we developed a psychometric together with neuroscientists and psychologists, really looking back over the last 30 years of research. And we built a psychometric that basically goes across 6 domains and assesses resilience of a workforce. So you can run this individually and have sort of a snapshot of the current level of resilience of a person. Or you run it as a team report or even a company report. And the insights from that, if you do that on a company level, is it shows you where your gaps are, right? It shows you which factors, for example, existing initiatives address well. It shows you where you're lacking. It shows you maybe different roles, different geographies where there's different needs or different things you're not seeing yet in your numbers, but that are there and that will hit your bottom line, that will hit, your ability to attract and retain talent going forward.
What are some examples of some of the questions or some of the parts of your diagnostic tool?
Yeah, so if you think about it as a circle, right, with six domains, 6 segments, right? So we have the big bucket. Health is the first one. And health is everything from sleep and other lifestyle factors like exercise, nutrition. And that sounds familiar from many, many places, but it's actually one of the biggest productivity drivers there is. That's why it's really, for us, it's foundational to assess that area. The second area is really in the domain of purpose, where we look at motivation. And I saw actually one of the episodes around burnout that you had recently, where you also talked about, motivation and meaning and having confidence in your ability. So that's the second part. The third part is really problem solving. So this is both how we can structure our day and how can we also work differently to really boost our analytical thinking and creative insight. Number 4 is perseverance, and that's what many people actually equate with resilience. And there's 2 elements that are important to perseverance. One is optimism, so actually, keeping a positive outlook even when things are not going as planned. And the other one is adaptability, because as they say, it's insanity if you try the same thing over and over again and you're expecting different results. And number 5 is composure. That's all about being able actually to know what emotions are you actually experiencing in a particular moment and how you can work constructively with them. And the last one is all about relationships. So creating connection, creating trust, and using intuition to actually adapt the way we act and with different kind of people. So this is in a nutshell the areas we look into. Okay. And you get like a pretty nice like spidery graph that really tells you where you need to work on. And the interesting part of it is that behind each of these 12 drivers, 2 for each domain, there is a whole bunch of evidence-based trainings that you can do and interventions you can do based on what we learned over the last 30 years of research that can basically, in a very targeted way, you can improve and train any of these areas. Because a lot of people think, resilience is about either you got it or you don't, but that's actually not true. It's something that you can build, and you can build it rather quickly, within a few months. So you don't need to wait for years and years and years to build your resilience.
Let's talk about that. Walk me through some of the things that a employer can do to help build resilience or to help just the overall mental health of their employees.
Ooh, that's a good one because it's a very big question, actually. Maybe if I take a step back, right, and talk about if we look at mental well-being programs in the workplace, which are actually the 5 things that really set apart the really, really successful programs out there, right? And the first one is actually that you anchor mental well-being in your business strategy, that it's not just like one topic that HR is juggling and HR is a central role, but it's actually part of your business strategy, which also means it's on the CEO agenda. Number 2 is that you secure leadership commitment. You will not move the needle unless you have the commitment of all leadership levels in the company. So what you often see is that companies, try to initiate a mental health initiative, but it's actually coming from the bottom of the organization, and you will not get really the scale and the visibility that you need to really have a successful program. Mm-hmm. And third one is really related, is really that it needs to be something that really drives cultural change, right? It permeates all parts of your operating model. It's not just something that you do on your mental health day, but it's something that needs to be integrated in your culture. The fourth one is really having a data-driven approach. It's not just something that you do once, but you need like in most consulting engagements, you need a solid baseline. You need to understand what's working and what's not, and what you need to close that gap. And then you need to monitor and, actually also improve as you move along. And then the last part is what we already talked about, is really that emphasis also in helping people build the skills to have resilience and deal with stressors effectively, because, we all know it. Stress is not going to go away, right? So the only thing that we can really change as individuals is how we work with it and how we respond to it. Employers can reduce risk factors for stress, but, I think it would be completely unrealistic to expect employers to remove all stresses from the workplace, right?
I agree. So that's kind of helpful characteristics of the system. In terms of specifics that an employer can do, I mean, the only things that kind of occur to me are, you could say, well, like, you got to take your time off, your vacation days, you're required to, or maybe you say, we don't want people emailing each other after a certain time at night or before a certain time in the morning, to give people some downtime. Or maybe you could give people some training about how to, react to each other and how to, speak politely and, in a positive way. But beyond those things, it's hard for me to imagine how a company could help on some of the things, like making their employees exercise or eat right or go to sleep early and, not stay up all night watching Netflix or something. So what are some of the specific changes beyond just making it a CO priority, but like, what are some of the specific things that a company can do to help with that resilience?
Yeah, I think the first one is, it starts way more basic than all of it, right? When we look at companies, and we just actually finished a work with 3 research institutions, and one of the astounding effects is, these are researchers, right? They should know the research. You would expect even neuroscientists, but it's actually that individuals often, they don't know where to start building resilience. They don't know what is involved in mental health and resilience. They know when they're not feeling right, but they actually don't know, it's like, if you talk to somebody who's just had a heart attack about exercise, that's probably too far down the road. And it's the same with mental health. It's something that you do today so that you can benefit from it for years to come. So one big part is actually creating that awareness of all the factors that play into mental health, tuning into actually recognizing not when things are really, really hard, but when things are not as good as they could be. Mm-hmm. Because it's like a long road, from really thriving to really struggling. And you want to catch it early, basically. So that's the first part. And the second part is really walking the talk, as a leader. If I talk about people should be, it's not enough to tell the people I'm working with, you should be disengaging, you should, have regular bedtimes, you should have a bedtime routine, and then emailing them God knows what time of the day, right? Or giving them phone calls. So I need to also be conscious of that and walk the talk. If I'm saying I make my sleep and my time with my family priority, and I tell my team that's okay, I need to do the same thing, right? I can't turn around and do the opposite by emailing people, by calling them up at all time and day of the night. And I'm not talking emergencies, I'm like talking directly kind of thing. Oh, I just typed out that email while I was waiting, for dinner or something, right?
Yeah, and maybe just jumping in there. I mean, one practical thing a company might do would be, and any of us can do, is get some kind of email plugin tool so that you can send emails later, right? You can send them for sending later. So like, look, if you want to work on the weekend, or if you're a night owl and you like to work at midnight or 2 a.m, or wake up at 4 a.m, or whatever, that's fine. But maybe instead of just, if that's when you like to work and send emails, great, but then schedule them to be sent during normal working hours.
Yeah, and that's a great example, because that's what we do in the company. I like writing a lot of emails, like Friday afternoon is my time to catch up on emails, but I schedule them, for Monday, and not even like 8 o'clock on Monday, but like 11:15 or something. Give everybody a chance to come in and take stock of what's happening before, bombarding them with all the stuff. Mm-hmm. So, it's really small things can already make a big difference. Right? It's things like we talked earlier. It's about things like feedback, right? We always think about feedback, and it's like, sometimes feedback can feel like the 10 things I hate about you, right? It's like, and simple things like knowing that we have this natural negativity bias, right? That we pay more attention, we give more emphasis, more belief to negative information. And many of us have experienced that reading the news. And I think you mentioned that you stopped reading the news, and it's actually, I think in January you mentioned, right?
I did. Yeah, that's exactly right. I stopped reading the news in January. January 6th, I spent basically the entire day, like just sort of.
Yeah, you get sucked in, right? They call it doom scrolling. There's even a word for it now.
Yeah, it's like on Twitter, and it wasn't good for my mental health. I was just stressing out about it. Particularly, I found that the national news is stuff that would stress me out, but it was outside my control. I wasn't doing anything about it, and so much of the news is not like, here's what happened that you really need to know, but it's, politicians they're expected to do this, or the court is expected to rule this way, or they're planning to introduce this bill. Like, it's not like I'm going to do anything about it. If I was going to consistently write my, representative in Congress or something and take action, maybe you could see it, but otherwise it's just stressing me out. Like, oh, this terrible thing may happen and I have no control over it.
And actually, this is also the negativity bias at work, right? And you need to really develop optimism. You need to kind of switch it around. And that permeates in everything, how we also communicate as leaders. When we deliver feedback, I think the ratio is like 3-1. We need to hear 3 positive things, positive messages to offset 1 negative. But more often than not, you might only hear from your boss if something went wrong, or you could do something better, or the deadline has moved earlier. And the problem with that is it's almost like setting a spam filter. The way we set our spam filters in our mind determine what we see. And there was like a really great experiment. I think the guy is called Wiseman, who studies also luck. And what he showed is that, so he had an experiment, he gave people a newspaper, right? And he said, I want you to count the number of pictures in this newspaper. And if you get it right in a certain time, I'm going to give you, I don't know, I'm just making up a number, $5. Mm-hmm. But the people who consider themselves luckier and optimists, so they got the right result within like 20 seconds, and everybody else took like a few minutes to count through all the pages. And that is because there was a message on page 2 that says, stop counting, there's 40 odd pictures in this newspaper. And when they asked all the other people who didn't consider themselves luckier or optimists, they literally did not see that message. Yeah. Their filters prevented them from seeing it. And there's like so much other research out there that shows it's really like you really literally set these filters and then you don't see information. It's the same when people spot opportunities in the workplace, right? So one of the exercises you can actually do is ask your team to start writing down almost like a gratitude journal at the end of the week, like the 3 opportunities they saw, no matter how small, it can be small. How can we work better as a team? How maybe for our product? What are small opportunities you spotted? Because over time you will reset these filters of your team, right? And rather than setting these filters on focusing on something negative, why not use that principle to zoom in on opportunities, right?
Wow, I love that idea. Okay, so make it a weekly habit to identify and share an opportunity, even if it's a small one.
Yeah, and especially the small ones, the big breakthroughs, how often do they happen, and how do little improvements, opportunities stack up over time, right? If you consistently identify small improvements, small opportunities, the effect will be much bigger than trying to get that one big thing.
So you mentioned earlier that there's some, part of this could be some training, some delivering some training around building resilience. And that's a little counterintuitive to me that you could, give someone training and help build their resilience. I would have thought that it's more something that it's kind of a natural set point. So what are some of the training interventions that can be done to help increase someone's level of resilience? So if you were going to increase my resilience, what would some of the trainings be that you would give me?
Yeah, so the answer is, as with many things, it depends a little bit, right? I would literally start with a diagnostic to really understand where you stand at the moment. If you like many people, probably your sleep would be one of the areas I would focus on first. And the reason is, if you're not sleeping well, it will not just take a toll on your body, on your motor skills, pain sensitivity, immune system, but it will actually also affect your brain, like what you pay attention to, how long you can pay attention, your decision maker, your creativity, how you respond to emotionally charged situations. And if I give you one example, as consultants, we have probably all pulled the one-nighter, right? Or we had the stressful project where we don't get a lot of sleep. And if you look at studies that show the effect of sleep deprivation on performance, and talking here cognitive performance, the scary thing is not, we all expect if we didn't sleep at all or only 2 hours that our performance suffers. But the scary part is actually if we, for example, consistently get only 4 hours of sleep over a couple of days, these performance lapses become cumulative. So after 10 days of not of sleeping only 4 hours a night, we are actually performing like somebody who's pulled 2 all-nighters. Even just a single night of 2 or 4 hours of sleep is equivalent in terms of physical and cognitive performance to somebody who's above the legal limit to drive. And if you ask, somebody, often it's a badge of honor in the workplace to have slept little, stayed late to push for the project. But if you would ask, a leader, how acceptable is it for somebody to come in to work drunk? They would just, say, whoa, way, no way, right? But in the way a lot of people are showing up with equivalent cognitive performance.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons, not the main reason, but that's one of the reasons that I left the Navy. I enjoyed my time in the submarine force, and there was, other reasons I left. It probably wasn't the right long-term career for me. But one thing that I didn't really like that much was that lack of sleep was just part of the job, right? So when we'd be out, if you were lucky, and when I was, sort of lucky, you'd be in 3-section watch. So you'd be on watch for 6 hours and off for 12. But we ran the boat on a 24-hour schedule, right? So you had this weird rotating thing where every few days you'd be basically, let's say you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 a.m., 0600, because you're going to run drills. So get up at 6 a.m., you run drills in the morning, you have lunch, run drills in the afternoon, and then maybe you have watch, and then maybe let's say in the evening you're doing some paperwork or something, and then you're on watch from midnight to 6 in the morning. And then you'd like to go to bed, but now 6 in the morning, okay, you have drills again the next day. So now you have drills from 6 to 12, 12 to 18. Oh, now 3-section watch. So now you're on watch from 18 to 24. So there'd be times where you're up for 24 hours. We had one readiness exam where I think I was up for almost 3 days straight, right? And I just like, oh man, it's okay when you're in the 20s maybe, but I didn't want to do that for the next 20 years. I was just really rough. And you can just easily see how that could just lead to bad decision making, right? Even right now, I usually wake up early, is it 4 or 5? So if it's like 9 o'clock at night, I'm stopping, because especially if you're doing something that requires a lot of attention to detail, it's so easy to send out and make mistakes, right? Just easily make mistakes.
Yeah, totally. And actually what you mentioned is also something that I observed in myself. I literally go to bed now before 10 o'clock, right? Yeah. And I get up really early, but it seems, when I was still, working in a consulting firm, it felt like, the early mornings did not really do much for you. It just meant you had a longer day, right? Versus the late nighters were sort of the badge of honor, what was expected to, pull one for the team. But in actual fact, we all have our natural biorhythms, but it's not the same for different people. You have the night owls who will, naturally find their peak late in the evening for doing analytical work, but you get actually more people who are, morning people or just somewhere in the middle, and they don't have their peak hours late in the evening. That's actually when they have their biggest dip.
Yeah, I think Daniel Pink has a book on this, right? I think it's When.
That's a good book. When is a good book. Yeah, there's a few books actually written on that, so on chronotypes. And I think there was also some studies where they optimized factories like shift work around chronotypes, and they found that they could reduce accidents and increase productivity just by optimizing around the extremes of the of the owls and the morning larks so that they didn't have to do their shifts out of sync with their chronotype.
Okay. So you're going to give me some training on resilience, let's say. And
Yeah.
the first lesson was about sleep. It's like, Will, you need to get more sleep. Okay. So I get that message and I start going to bed earlier. Like I go to bed at 9:30. Okay. What's the next lesson here? If you're going to be teaching Will Bachman how to be more resilient?
Yeah. So I will actually teach you a lot more about sleep. I will also teach you that sleep is more about what you do during the day than what you actually do during the night.
Say about that. Tell me about that.
So it's, for example, when you sleep, right? When you sleep is one part. We often think about sleep as really literally when we go to bed. Mm-hmm. But a big thing, for example, is other things we do during the day. When do we drink the last cup of coffee? When do we exercise? When do we have dinner? If you're a smoker, when do you have your last smoke? And also very important in today's age is when do you disengage from tech? Mm-hmm. Right? Because these factors all affect your sleep, and some of them affect it much more profoundly than we think. For example, caffeine stays in your body like 7-8 hours, which means literally if you're going to go to bed at 10, your last cup of coffee should be no later than like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, unless you want to upset your sleep quality. So it's as much of when do we do things during the day, the same with exercise. Especially if it's cardio, it will actually change our metabolism and make it much more difficult maybe to fall asleep or get good quality sleep. So exercise should really be 3-4 hours before our bedtime.
So at least 3 to 4 hours before your bedtime. Okay. That's not a problem for me. Okay.
Yeah. So you can really work, we literally help our clients come up with a schedule that says, this is your optimal wake and sleep time based on your chronotype. And then you work your way back, right? 8 hours before that is your last caffeine intake. 4 hours before bedtime is the latest you can do your exercise. 3 hours before bedtime is dinner or alcohol. 2 hours if you're a smoker is your cigarette.
So wait, so you should not eat within 3 hours of bedtime? Is that
that would be the optimal, yeah.
Okay, because your body is like digesting it and your blood sugar is up and so forth.
Exactly, it changes your metabolism again.
Okay, so I should, let's say if I want to go to bed at, let's say 10 o'clock, but maybe at 9 o'clock. So 10 o'clock, I should not have coffee after 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't eat after 7 p.m. Okay, so that's helpful to know. And then I stopped drinking alcohol actually a year ago, and I never smoked, so I'm okay there. All right, and then I should not exercise. Normally exercise in the morning, so I'm good there.
Okay. So you're good there. Maybe the last one is, stop using your screens about an hour and a half before bed, because the blue light will actually kind of trigger your brain again to wake up. It will change the melatonin level.
Has that been replicated, that research? Because I've seen some of that stuff, and then I thought I saw something that kind of was skeptical of that. But is that pretty solid?
There's two factors, right? One is the blue light, and generally just dimming bright light will help.
Yeah.
But the other factor, at least nowadays, that's much more important, is actually the stimulation we get from our devices, right? It's that it's either this stress response if we get an email from our boss telling us about the deadline, and the next morning it's reading the news, bad news. That will, get us stressed again before bed. It's also the boost of dopamine we get, like going on our social media and seeing somebody liked our post, right? It's that kind of stimulation of the system when we're actually trying to wind down. That's much more important even than the blue light.
So that's interesting to know. So it might be okay, or it might be less bad to read a book on a Kindle with a screen versus checking Twitter on your phone, where you're getting that kind of ramped up, or even worse, where you're getting like an email and then either you respond or you don't respond, but then it's hanging over you. Oh, I got to respond to this email in the morning. So it's kind of what you're looking at as well as the light itself.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's good. All right. So talk through those things. Avoid stimulations. Don't look at your email. Don't exercise within 4 hours. Don't alcohol, sugar, dinner. Don't smoke. Anything else around sleep that I should know about?
Yeah, we literally, one of the things we ask our clients to do is what we call a bedroom audit.
Okay.
So we're looking at various factors that affect sleep that they should look for in the bedroom. So for example, light, not just from the melatonin production, but generally people sleep much, much better when they are in a dark room.
Okay.
And there's different things you can do, right? You can have like different curtains that shut out the light. You can cover up like electronics that have a blue or red light that lights up your room. It can be, the second one is sound, nighttime noise, even things like the fridge, right? If you can, especially if you're living in a studio apartment, your fridge might make a lot of noise. It might be ticking devices. So anything that sound can disrupt your sleep. Temperature is a big one. A lot of people sleep in a room that's far too warm for optimal sleep because, and I'm not good on I'm only in the metric system and the European one, but 16 to 18 degrees Celsius, and I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, is actually the optimal bedroom temperature. And that's a lot lower than what most people opt for.
No kidding. So having it a little chillier and nice, some blankets. Okay.
Yeah. So generally it's easier for us to fall asleep and stay asleep in a colder room than a warmer room. And some of these things, especially if you're traveling a lot for business, is also important because when you get to a hotel room, you can literally implement some of these things. Or I select my hotel when I'm traveling to my corporate clients at the beginning of a project. I actually look for a hotel where in the initial weeks where it will be really dark in the room. I will check for how quiet it is. I will check actually also whether they have rooms that have the same layout, and then book into the same layout, because everything that's familiar, and I'll explain to you in a second, will make it easier to fall asleep. Smell can help you. Like if you have an aromatherapy oil, familiar smells will make it easier. Anything that is familiar will give you better sleep. So you might have heard that dolphins sleep with one eye open, right? The aquatic animals have to keep on swimming to breathe, so they cannot actually stop and sleep. So when you're swimming with dolphins, you will sometimes notice that they have one eye open and one eye closed. And that's because one half of their brain is asleep. They do this unihemispheric sleep, and at some point they switch. And then the other half of their brain gets rest. And we have a mild version of that when we are sleeping for the first time in a new place. So literally the left hemisphere of our brain is like a watchdog and doesn't sleep as deeply. So it reacts more strongly to sound, and anything that's out of the ordinary. And that's also called the first night effect. And it goes away on the second night, but it affects our performance on the first day after sleeping in an unfamiliar place. So if you're a consultant sleeping in a different hotel every week, you get this effect each and every week. So by choosing a hotel that has similar room layout, or going into the same hotel, trying to get the same room layout, you make it more familiar to your brain. So you reduce that first night effect that you would get in sleeping in a completely unfamiliar place, which you will then feel the next day in how alert you are and your energy levels. And if you're traveling a lot for work, it's going to stack up for you.
Right. Okay. So try to get in the same exact room, or the same room with the same layout, or a room with the same layout.
Yeah. And then make it dark, put a towel. If there's light coming in from the hallway, just put a towel there. So you kind of make it really dark. Put the aircon down so that it's really like a low temperature. Use earplugs if it's not quiet there. Just, you can optimize your sleep that way, especially when you're traveling.
Okay. Let's talk about, let's go beyond sleep. Do you get much into diet or mindfulness or exercise or other topics?
Yeah, so we touch on diet and exercise. We don't really go that deep into that because it's a whole animal for itself. But one of the things you can do if you're looking at improving your cognitive performance and your resilience is actually doing just like 20 minutes of exercise a day at about 60 to 80% of your maximum heart rate. So much lower heart rate than most people would pick for a vigorous cardio. And literally what you do doesn't matter. And what they have shown also with students is that doing that first thing in the morning will improve your ability to retain your information. It will boost your mood levels, but it will also help your concentration and your focus. Okay. So actually, low heart rate exercise, just 20 minutes makes a big difference. So we go into deliberate tactics like this, but we don't go that much deeper. Where we spend a lot of time on where the mindfulness comes in is actually emotional regulation. So how do you actually recognize what you're feeling in the moment, and how can you work with that constructively? So if you think about emotions, if you ask people, so how are you? Most people say like good, bad, okay, and it's like emotions are almost like our first language, right? We learn to distinguish emotions way before we actually speak, but we treat it really like an unwanted something, right? Most people are really illiterate at recognizing what they're feeling. They know when they're really angry, and they know when they're happy, but all the other emotions and the stuff in between, they have trouble pinpointing that. So we literally help people build up an emotional vocabulary. Because only if you know what actually is happening, you can actually work constructively with it. And if you look like, studies stuck people into a scanner, and once they're able to identify their emotions, especially if they are stressed, you see that the activation of the reptilian brain that has like the fight or flight response, it goes right down, right? As soon as they say, oh, this is anger, this is sadness, activity goes right down. So it doesn't feel as intense anymore. It doesn't feel overwhelming anymore.
Once you identify it.
Yeah, once you identify it. And when you practice it, it's like building any vocabulary for any language. It just comes like that. It's not like something where you have to open your dictionary and search for it, right? But you reduce the intensity of especially negative experiences immediately. And then that opens space to respond. Because if you're really just in the grip of being really angry or sad or threatened, you will not be able to respond properly.
So if you were giving me this training, what would some of the tips be around, Will, here's how to kind of recognize and name the emotions that you're experiencing? Like, how would you teach people?
Yeah, I would actually give you two very simple things, and it's a very simple task. I would say, here's an emotions chart, like a map of emotions. And now I just want you to 4 or 5 times a day, just check in with yourself and just say, is it good or bad? And then try to pinpoint the emotion. So literally the chart will tell you, is it how intense it is? Is it a towards or an away response? And you will start just practicing it. You will think about what's the situation, what did actually just happen before I experienced that emotion. So you will just practice doing it. So it's like with almost any skill, you just have to practice it and sit down and do it. And the way your chart will look like, it's literally collect data, will tell you also a lot about how you deal with emotions. So if it's almost like a flat line, you might be bottling. If it's almost always in the negative space, you might be ruminating. And you can start to distinguish which kind of situations maybe set off a rumination and which ones will cause you to bottle emotions. So I literally had a client, an executive in a company, and he was always scoring himself like on a scale from 0 to 9, with 9 being the best it could be, like 7 to 9 all the time. And then I saw a 6 and said, what happened with a 6? And he was like, you know what? I was out on the weekend. We were hiking with my wife, and I was thinking about changing my job and what it would mean for my family. And I had a panic attack, and I couldn't breathe, and I was on the floor. And I said, "That's a 6."
A panic attack on the floor. Wow, this sounds like a good exercise. Do you have a link that we could include in the show notes for that kind of emotion chart?
Yeah, I can fix up one for you.
All right, that'd be fantastic. So we will include that link in the show notes. Listeners, if you want to try this, and I think I'm going to try this, if you want to try to identify your emotions throughout the day, like Nadine suggests, let's try that. Okay. So identify your emotions throughout the day, just to sort of get the experience of checking in and saying, what am I experiencing right now? And beyond this binary, happy, sad, just trying to get more refined and realize that there's more, a lot more flavors than just yes or no, right?
Yeah. Imagine playing a piano, you're just hitting the same 2 tones over and over again. But, even if it's 2 very beautiful keys, it gets boring fairly quickly.
So if I'm doing this and I'm learning to recognize, okay, I'm experiencing, I don't know, what would be, other than angry or happy, I'm feeling poignant right now, or like, what would some examples be of some emotions outside the happy?
Yeah, it could be like joy, it could be contempt, disgust. So I think we work with a relatively small set that's maybe like 20 emotions to start with, but they build it up to like 40, but there's literally hundreds, right? The more like there's compassion, it gets really complex. You have the 8 primary emotions, then the combination of those, it's like mixing watercolors, right? Becomes secondary emotions, and then you can do tertiary ones.
And then you recognize it, and then once you can actually name it and recognize it, the idea is that the intensity of negative emotions can be more subdued, right? Because now you've named that thing, and you can address it.
Yeah, that's the first thing, and then you start developing strategies of then how to deal with it constructively in the moment, so that you're not going off on autopilot, but you're actually working with it. Okay. And one of the things people can do is you start looking for patterns in your chart. So you chart it for a couple of weeks and you start looking for patterns. What are the things that trigger the same, especially uncomfortable, negative emotion? What triggers anger? What am I actually thinking in that moment? What is actually behind that reaction? Right. So you want to start seeing the patterns that you have, because once you become aware of the patterns, you will often notice that it has actually nothing to do with the present situation, but with an assumption that you're making, right, about what it means about you.
Tell me a little bit now about your practice and what an engagement would look like for you around all of these things we've been discussing. So do companies say, hey, my employees tend to, sound like, it seems like my employees are stressed out and mentally, they're not doing the best that they could be, and find you? And then what would a project look like?
Yeah, so a typical project for us is, for example, that we work with a group of employees who raised their hand and said, look, I'm struggling, I would like to improve. And we work with them literally in a 9-week training set. Over 9 weeks, we work with them in a training, going through different elements of resilience, practicing the last week really being charting the way forward, so that they have a path of how to continue building their resilience after. So that's one way. The second or third way is actually helping organizations design trainings. So we run our diagnostic tool, and we help them actually design a training curricula that will address these different areas. And sometimes it's also, only the diagnostic, and then they bring in their companies or their internal departments to build a training to really address the challenges they identified. And the third one is maybe more like classical coaching. We'll start again with a diagnostic, and then it's more like a personal one-on-one coaching over a certain period of time. And then we do the check-in, what changed, where do you still need to work on? And that's a more personalized journey then.
And let's share a link for listeners. If people want to go and find out more about your practice, where would you point them online?
The easiest is to go to our website, mindmatters.pro.
Okay, we will include that link in the show notes, mindmatters.pro.
Cool.
Nadine, thank you so much for joining today. This was really helpful. I'm going to take some of these to the bank and work on implementing some of these. I'll be checking in with my emotions and being mindful about screen time and a lot of other tips. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you. It was a real nice opportunity to finally get to meet you.